back to another episode. I am joined with a very special guest today, my friend Barbara. Do you want to just introduce yourself, kind of how you got into mineral balancing, women's health, and things like that?
Hi. My name is Barbara Madimenos. I'm a women's integrative health coach with a specialty in mineral balancing and hormones. And I kind of got into this accidentally. I initially started health coaching for the very purpose of just being really into nutrition. I was also trying to heal myself. I was struggling with a pretty severe eating disorder for a solid 20 years of my life. And I was around 25 years old and I broke my hip and I was diagnosed with osteoporosis. And they were like, hey, so you have the bones of a menopausal woman, and at the rate that you're going at, you're going to be in a wheelchair by 40. And I was like, no, that's not happening. And no one ever spoke to me about the composition of the mineral matrix and bones, and how important estrogen and progesterone are for your bones and all that. Their only resolution was here's the pill.
Yep.
So and that kind of catapulted me to change my framework on what I wanted to do with health coaching. So from just basic nutrition and weight loss and what most people typically look at a health coach, I was like, okay, let me go into women's hormones. And then through that, I was like, wait a second, hormones, they're just chemical messengers, what make hormones. And that's where I started diving more into the mineral balancing aspect, and here we are today.
We kind of have a similar story because I had graduated college with my bachelor's, and then I was working for a chiropractor for my internship. Completely unrelated field of nutrition. I graduated with a degree in media and a minor in psychology, and he was like, you're really into nutrition and things and kind of what we do here at the office. Why don't you go to where he went, which was Logan University in, I think, Missouri. They had an online master's degree for nutrition, and he was like, you don't know what you want to do yet, take a year or two to do your master's, figure out kind of what you want out of life and your career and stuff. But we both knew that I wanted to do something in the wellness space, nutrition space, because I was diagnosed with celiac at 12, PMDD at 19, suspected endometriosis just because I never underwent the surgery at 18. And so I kind of had the same thing that you did. It was always here's a pill, here's a pill, here's a pill. And after a while, the pill just wasn't working. It was making things worse, especially getting on antidepressants. And so once I had finished with that program, I remember reading in one of my textbooks, it was a half of a page of minerals, and it didn't even go into sulfur, copper. It was literally just calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium, just the macros. And it didn't even touch on any other minerals that help our bodies make neurotransmitters or make hormones. And so it was kind of I left feeling it was so clinical, which I knew I never wanted to go the hospital clinical route, feeling there was so much more that we just weren't taught. And it's we had to go fishing for that information ourselves because they don't teach it to you. They're not even aware of how powerful minerals are.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's funny because I remember after I broke my hip and they were really pushing hormones on me, which I understand, at the time I was extremely underweight. I wasn't getting my period. I hadn't gotten my period for 14 years at that point. It was obvious I needed a little bit of help and intervention. But I remember I was like, I don't want to just be put on birth control. I want something that's going to help rebuild my bones. I don't think it's just the hormones, because they were telling me just go take vitamin D. They weren't even telling me calcium, K2, magnesium, boron, all that stuff, silica. And so I was like, okay, hold up, let me do some research myself. So I went home. I have actually a bachelor's in communications with a certificate in journalism. So this is something that I've been doing from the beginning. Research is my background. And I remember finding papers upon papers of how important minerals are, for the bones and for them to remineralize. And I brought them to my endocrinologist, and he was like, you don't need that. And I was like, but why? I don't understand. understand, like, this is so important. And I brought it to my internist, my surgeon, you know, like, none of them were like acknowledging it. And I was like, I feel like I'm going crazy. Like, am I misunderstanding this? And it's not that it's their fault. It's just they're taught something differently. They're taught to resolve a problem with a medication. It's not like, how do we fix the original problem so it doesn't get worse? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think that's where so many people, especially within recent years, are getting really fed up with conventional medicine, because they're being fed pill after pill after pill. And I've been lucky to work with a lot of clients that have either recently come off medication or they've never been on medication within years. But I have had a couple, like a handful, where they're on high blood pressure medication and then high cholesterol medication, but they don't realize that the medicine for high blood pressure is lowering the minerals that we actually need to manage blood pressure. And so it's crazy, because then you can't give them like certain supplements because it interferes with that prescription. And so it's so crazy how, you know, they do, it's kind of like done on purpose, which I think a lot of us know that for a reason. There's always that hidden agenda. But I think so many more people are becoming more aware of what's truly going on, and that they're not getting better. Like, they're constantly going to the doctor every year. And in our local Facebook group, somebody had posted a couple weeks ago of what are more things that you would like to see. And we live in a very small town, so we don't have that much in general. And everyone's commenting, we need more doctors' offices. We need more doctors for this specialist and this specialist, so we don't have to drive to Atlanta or to Asheville or to Charlotte. And it's crazy, because it's like, you can have all these specialists, but they're still probably not going to help you get to the root. They're just going to add on another medication for you to have to stop by the pharmacy and grab.
Yeah, and I find like that's the problem also with it. It depends on like the team that you have, right? But like in my experience, like most of the specialists on your medical team will not even communicate. So they're like, you're here for the problem that you're coming to me for. You can go speak to that other person for that other problem. And they're not even acknowledging that it's like, that it's all intertwined, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people will call, you know, health coaches or chiropractors or naturopaths the quacks. But a lot of them, which there are the bad eggs, you always have a bad egg. But a lot of us have studied the body so intensely that it's like we can understand how this can impact this, and because it's impacting this, it's also going to impact this, and start kind of finding those where it like kind of like snowball effects into symptoms, and be able to pinpoint what is causing this, and because it's this, it's also that. And that's where I think a lot of doctors have a hard time, is because they're so by the textbook that they're seeing things in black and white. Meanwhile, we're seeing things in a full rainbow, a full spectrum of colors, looking at the body through a different lens than most doctors do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just because we're taught differently, right? Like we're taught to like make the connections and figure out the root cause, whereas with them it's like problem resolution, you know? And that's where we get stuck. I remember even like with my eating disorder, a lot of them were like, well, why don't we put you on antidepressants or like some type of antipsychotic or something? And I mean, understandably, you know, when you're working through something like that, you know, it's like something trauma related. You know, it's a mental illness. I mean, I do also understand that some people can develop eating disorders through like some type of physical manifestation as well. But it's like, what is an antidepressant going to do for me? You know, like we're not fixing the problem of like why I stopped eating, you know? And we also, I mean, just to tie it in with minerals, you know, many people, especially with anorexia, develop like a severe zinc deficiency, which exacerbates their eating disorder, you know? So like imagine if we had this knowledge back then, many people might not even get as severe as they do, because most people tend to relapse 3, 4, 5 times in their lifetime with an eating disorder, you know? And that's yes, the mental illness is part of it, but like having a severe zinc deficiency cuts your appetite, makes you unable to digest food. Obviously, you feel very depressed, sometimes
Alters
even
your taste
anxious.
buds. And
Exactly.
then it impacts copper, which
Yeah.
copper, from what I found in a lot of my clients, and you probably have too, is that it kind of can mirror emotional and even spiritual trauma that people have. So it does go hand in hand with eating disorders, which I think, like you said, a lot of people miss these big, you know, precursors to what's causing somebody to not want to eat, or they don't like the taste of food anymore, or maybe they stop eating because it hurts their stomach, or an emotional trigger, or whatever the case may be. It's like these deep buried wounds that we have inside of our bodies are also being triggered by mineral imbalances.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you say like copper kind of like mirrors like a traumatic response because I listen, I think you and I think we've gone through like hundreds, if not thousands, clients by now, but I have never seen anyone with my hair test ever. And I have two jobs. I have my own little clientele going on, and I also work for another company that does strictly hair testing. And I'm seeing hundreds of people a month at this point. No one has ever had the patterns of what I have with my copper levels. And it's not like I have candida. It's not like I live in mold. I've never been on birth control. Like I think I took estrogen once for like 3 months after breaking my hip, but that's it. Like it doesn't make sense the level of copper that I have until I made a connection sometime last year where I was like, shit, copper is a trauma response. Like when you're copper dumping, it's
Yes.
you're releasing your body is there's like a trauma dump in a way,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I found that so fascinating when it clicked into me, and I was like, man, no, it's this copper issue that many people are have. For sure, we live in a very estrogenic world, I'm not denying it, but I think it has a lot to do, especially with women, how much they're denying of what they experience in their life, and they're trying to like hold it together.
Yep, absolutely. So when I did my first hair test years ago, which it would have been so interesting to see what my hair test looked like throughout my entire lifetime, but we don't always get that opportunity because a lot of people just don't know what it is. But when I did my first hair test, I had a calcium shell of 304, 305. I was actively copper dumping. My sodium and potassium were off the charts. I had magnesium loss pattern going on. Um, and I was going through such a horrible, terrible relationship at the time where it pulled me away from my family, it pulled me away from my friends, it isolated me. I was in a narcissistic, abusive relationship, and it's like you're battling your own family because they're like trying to pull you away, and you're obviously going to go with the partner because that's just how life is. And I was like, still like freshly so young at the time, and then I had worked on it, got out of that toxic relationship, and then started working on my mineral balancing. And then I noticed that even like I've always had that anxious attachment style in relationships, started to get so much better, started to improve, even with the relationship I'm in now, which I think it also helps having a very healthy and stable partner too, to not trigger your anxious attachment. But just small things like that. And then I had gone into a four lows pattern for about 2 years, I think, which I think you saw my hair test in one of the Facebook groups that I posted in. And then recently I got my hair test back, and I'm trying to find the date because it was, I think, February, like very end of February. And then I started copper dumping again. And during February, I was going through just work life balance shifts, family triggers again, losing animals, putting down my pony, which was the worst thing I've ever had to do. And so it's like coming out of so much of that and realizing how much trauma was stuck to specific people in my life. It just makes so much sense why now I'm starting to dump copper. And before I wasn't, because I couldn't work on those because I was in a four lows pattern. I was too depleted to even think about addressing my trauma head on. I was just trying to get through my everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. And like with, especially when you're copper dumping, I find that a lot of people miss the boat because so many people, they're so hyper focused on um, like where are you getting your copper, and it's like
Yes.
it's not always that you have an exposure to copper. It could also just be for the very fact that your adrenals are so weak, you can't send that signal to the liver to make like the binding proteins, where the way I see it is like copper dumping isn't always like a form of toxicity. It could also be a loss. Just like how we read is a high zinc or a high magnesium or high potassium as like a loss. Because I find specifically with myself, since I've been copper dumping, I have had every single symptom of like low copper symptoms. But the answer isn't to induce yourself more with copper. The answer is, how do you regulate your body to start retaining copper better? And just like how you went through your experience, that overstimulation of the adrenals, where you're not using your binding proteins, totally screws you up, right? It's like a nervous system adrenal reaction.
And that's where I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding the hair test, working with clients, and you've probably run into this issue too, is they think like, oh, well, this is high, I need to stop eating dairy, or this is low, I need to, and it's such a fine line, because we can't just look at one mineral in isolation, because they all work together. We have to look at your nervous system, we have to look at your sleep patterns, your circadian rhythm, what are you eating, how much water are you drinking a day, are you eating balanced meal, like there's so much that goes into it. And Dr. Selig talks about this too. Like, he goes into astrology and the time of that you were born, and what lunar cycle it was in, and what's going on, and what planet was ruling that month or that year or whatever. And there's so much more that goes into it that I think a lot of people kind of miss the mark in understanding that it's not just a simple, here's your one-time protocol and you should feel better, and then you'll never have to work on balancing your minerals ever again. It's a continuous progress to balance your minerals and to get your hormones balanced and your adrenals functioning again. And especially adrenals take so long to come out of adrenal fatigue that I think so many people kind of, especially with the copper issue, they just think, well, let me do 3 to 4 ounces of beef liver every week and I should be good to go, right? And it's like, well, no, because that might overstimulate you and keep your adrenals in that burnt out pattern. But also sometimes people, when they're stuck in that pattern, they kind of can crave that stress and overstimulation. Like, it's hard for them to rest. I was working with a client recently where she's like, I'm so tired starting to take my calcium and my magnesium. And I was like, well, it's probably just your body's way of wanting to rest. Like, you haven't been sleeping. You've been going and going and going and pulling all-nighters and working, and your body doesn't have time to rest. And you're craving this overstimulation and this drive all the time, that it's like a foreign language for their body to want to sleep.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I feel like also going back to your point on like feeling tired and the adrenals and stuff, like I think that's just what we're taught as a society, right? You know, to be overstimulated and to like push ourselves beyond exhaustion and all that. And when you have this moment of release, or even just like a moment of peace, you're like, this is so foreign to me. Like, what am I supposed to do with it? And I don't know if we grew up the same way, but like, you know, when we were, at least I can recall when I was younger, no cell phones, no computers, whatever. I mean, you know, I'm not old, but I mean, it was just the way I was taught. Like, go outside, go into the park, get bored.
Ride your bike. Yeah. Allow yourself to be bored. I remember my parents, like, we would be like, we're bored. And they'd be like, okay, we'll find something to do. Like, use your imagination. Like, it was never, here's a cell phone, here's a tablet, ever, unless we were at computer class in school. You know what I mean? It was never that. And now it's like, we're not allowing ourselves to be bored, or even our children to be bored. And I think that's why so many kids are developing these behavioral disorders and their overstimulation and then violence and criminals, because they're not being, which some parents will say, well, they can't be bored, your child always has to be busy. But let them think of ways to be busy, because it stimulates their brain.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because I mean, then that also helps you self-regulate. You know, when you don't know how to cope and self-regulate, then that's a problem, because then you're in this constant, you're constantly, I don't want to say not everyone's going to look for validation, but they're looking for an outsource of something to help them wind down and self-soothe. You know,
Yes.
you are now suddenly dependent rather than independent.
Yes. And I think especially, which some people get mad at me because I'm not a parent, so I can't like tell people how to parent their child. But just from giving my experience from growing up, it was kind of like we had to learn how to self-soothe. We didn't just cry and then have a tablet thrown in our face to shut up while the parents were eating dinner at Outback Steakhouse. You know, we had to learn how to be a part, which I think that's something that a lot of people lack, because when we look at ancient cultures and traditions, children were involved. It wasn't always like they had a separate table for them to eat at Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner. Like, they were involved with helping prep the food and, you know, peeling the potatoes and being involved as much as possible. And now it seems like a lot of people just don't even want to be around their kids. But then looking at it from a different perspective too, those are the moms that are so depleted, and they might be copper toxic, or they might have a calcium shell and they feel withdrawn from their kids, that they can't make those connections because there is a biochemical barrier that is being put up inside the body for a reason. And so it's like looking at it from a few different angles that I find so interesting, because whenever I run into people like that, just, you know, in my town, I'm always like, I would love to see what your mineral profile is, of why you're acting the way that you're acting. And by now we can kind of like pinpoint what it could be, but just to see it on paper, it just makes it all make so much more sense as to why people parent the way they parent, or why they just throw a tablet in their kid's face, or they just, hearing their kid even laugh just makes them so overstimulated, and they're like, my kid is having fun, I should be happy about that, but I'm so like wound up and overstimulated anytime that they make a peep.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's funny how you say sometimes you meet people and you're like, I wonder what your chart looks like. I'm always like that. I'm like, you know, when you know how it's like sometimes, you know, when you were younger, you would just people watch, you know, you'd be at the park and just look.
Still do.
I do that all the time now. Like, you just look at their mannerisms, you're listening to what their words, their, just the way that they're acting. And immediately, I can't exactly quite tell, like, the elements like individually, but I can pick up immediately almost like their mineral ratios.
Yes.
And it's so funny because I sometimes do this with my clients lately, where what I'll do is I'll meet with them first, I'll do a consult, and then I'll write up like a plan for them, and I say, okay, this is your basic plan before supplements, let's wait for the hair test. And when we get the hair test, I don't even have to change the plan, because minerals literally manifest into your personality. And so eventually you pick up on these little things where you kind of know, well, like why or how someone is like reacting the way that they are.
Yes. Yep. It's so funny because I don't remember where we were going, but my boyfriend and I were driving the other day, and somebody was having really bad road rage and like cut us off and was just nasty. And he was like, well, they're probably copper toxic, or they probably have a high sodium potassium ratio. And it's so funny because before him and I started dating, he knew nothing about nutrition, about minerals, about anything. And now he's kind of like can pick up and being like, that person did this. What do you think is going on in their bodies? Like, do you think they have a parasite? Do you think they have like a gut issue going on, or like a mineral imbalance? And I'm like, yeah, for sure, because it manifests as your personality.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so funny how your boyfriend is. I like how you totally rubbed off on him.
It's so funny, but it's so true, because like the way that people are like type A or type B, or quick to anger, or they've got a short fuse, or, you know, like I know like some of my clients that have a very high sodium potassium ratio, to calmly like dive into their hair test and their symptoms, because sometimes they can be, well, no, let's not this. It can't be this. And they can kind of be so mean sometimes, and they probably don't mean to be that way, but it's that high sodium, it's that depleted potassium, that they can't feel their experiences the way that potassium allows us to, and kind of be, I see potassium as more of like a feminine mineral too, and like very fluid, and sodium is more of that masculine, that rigid, that on the go stimulation mineral. And so it makes sense why those people are usually like quick to think that somebody's always attacking them too.
Yeah, and it's funny how you say like the masculine and feminine, because I actually made a post on this, I think about a year or two ago. Pretty sure it was a year ago, about how like the mineral ratios represent like that yin and yang, that feminine and masculine ratio. Always the first mineral is the masculine and the second one is the feminine. So like the calcium to phosphorus, masculine, feminine, calcium to magnesium, masculine to feminine. Same thing with the sodium, potassium, masculine to feminine, right?
Yep.
And you see these patterns, and I was picking up on certain patterns with my clients because most of them are women, and I was seeing how like typically when a ratio is more on like, if it's too high, I find that they feel worse than better. So like they're very much in their masculine when they have a higher ratio, whereas when they're lower, they are technically more in their feminine, but depends like how low they go. And I think this is just something that maybe this new generation of HTMA practitioners is going to pick up on, because I mean, Dr. Pollack and Dr. David Watts, like, great, fantastic, but we can't forget they were men. They were looking at it through a male perspective, and I don't know if there's enough research for us to like really point out like, do the mineral ratios affect, or must there be a different range for women and men? Because especially for women in their cycling years, and do we need more of those feminine minerals too? Like, there's always something in the back of my mind where I'm like, this is just an interesting thought, that we might want to like watch.
I've also picked up on that recently because I've been working with a lot of prenatal and postpartum women, and especially when they are pregnant with girls, it's almost like their need for potassium, they crave it. I've seen much more than clients that have been pregnant with boys, which is interesting. But that potassium, I feel like it's such a depleted mineral overall. And I always tell everyone like 4,800 milligrams, try to, and then it increases to 5,200 if you're pregnant and breastfeeding. But looking at it through that lens of pregnancy and postpartum, we're giving away our mineral stores to our baby. And so we're going to require more of those nutrients, especially to feel, because I think a lot with postpartum depression, I've always seen calcium shells with them. Either calcium shells or very, very low calcium. And it's just interesting because it's like, especially with that calcium shell, it causes that withdrawal, that isolation, that disconnection from their child. Like, I've heard hundreds of people say like, oh, my baby was born and I just didn't feel anything. And a lot of people normalize that, but if we look back at ancient texts and cultures, traditions, that's not necessarily normal. Like, there's a reason why you feel disconnected. Like, you should be touching your belly and belly mapping throughout pregnancy and speaking to your baby, and some people just don't want anything to do with even touching their belly, and it's like we're so disconnected from the feminine. And then if you were to look at their mineral tests, like you said, they're probably so deficient or very depleted in those feminine minerals.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with, like we were saying before, like the psychology of how these minerals are influencing us. And of course, then we have to also take into account like metals. I mean, not everyone's gonna agree with me on this, but absolutely, we live in a very metal-laden world, way more than before. And I think we live in a very mineral-depleted world, which it makes us all that more susceptible to metals. But when I start mineral balancing with someone, my goal isn't to like detox you of metals. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I agree.
That's not my priority.
Yep, I agree.
But I do feel like when we do start backtracking and retracing with metal detoxes, you do feel a difference. I remember when I went through I went through a small cadmium dump and a small lead dump at one point about 2 years ago, and it like flipped the switch in me. Flipped a massive. I like changed overnight. all at the same time, I was also going through a copper dump, but I've been copper dumping the past like 3 years. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's been a while. But that lead and cadmium dump, I remember it so clearly. I felt so different from one night to the next. And I was like, what was this? It was like all of a sudden I can talk, like I wasn't suppressed anymore.
Yes. Yep.
Wild, 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 wild. And when you start looking at like the antagonist to like these metals, like cadmium affects like calcium, magnesium, and zinc, and then lead affects like calcium and zinc, and you're like, oh, I get it now. Like that was like weighing on me.
That's how I had a small nickel dump a couple years ago. And I had one last huge, and I also had a calcium shell at the same time. So I think it was kind of like going hand in hand there. But I had one last huge meltdown, like not proud of it at all, but threw a toaster across the room, just a huge anger outburst. And then I went to bed. I woke up the next morning and I was like, you know what? I feel like myself, like a way that I haven't felt in the past like 2 or 3 years. And it was so wild that it was like the wall came crumbling down around me. And I was like, I'm me again. Like I am seeing the world for what it is. I saw colors more vibrantly again. Like I wasn't dull, which I think that's another interesting thing too, is like when you start to heal, you start to be like seeing more color and wanting to be like a little bit more colorful, and like just the world is just more vibrant again.
Yeah, it's so crazy how like when people go through these little metal dumps, they change like overnight. It's massive to me. And one thing I also noticed is I went through 3 burnouts consecutively, starting from 2021 to 2023. Okay, one after the other, back to back. It was wild. Okay, and then 2023. That's when I started copper dumping. Okay, so but what's interesting to me, I'm still going through the copper dump, and I do not recommend. It's a pain in the ass. Like I've lost half of my hair. Like my collagen is not as great. Like it's been very, very rough on my body. And I know it's not because I'm exposed to anything. I've done every single test, oat test, GI map test, whatever, hormone test, whatever. It's genuinely because of the life that I'm living and the stress that I'm experiencing. But that's not the point. My point is when you start copper dumping, you start feeling emotions.
Yes.
It's insane, And so from going through 3 burnouts, refusing to feel shit for life, and now 3 years later, you're crying over everything. It's like, it's a healing journey, Well, and I'm sure you felt that.
Yes. And I'm kind of feeling it now where I'm not going through as big of a copper dump as I did before, because my copper wasn't super, super elevated on my last hair test. But it's like the social anxiety is coming back a little bit more, so I know to always carry around some homeopathic remedies to take as needed just to help me in social situations, because it was one of my biggest symptoms that I had the first time around. Was I just got to a point where I couldn't leave the house because my panic attacks were so bad. But copper makes you feel things that you probably haven't felt in years. And so that's why I think, especially from a relationship perspective too, having a partner that understands, because I always tell my clients that, of course, it's okay to work with a practitioner, but don't depend on that practitioner as if that practitioner is God, because they're not going to be able to heal you in that way. But also, we can't outsource every single need or want to somebody else. Like we have to get to a point where we're taking accountability for our health, for our family's health, for our children's health. And that's where I think it's so important to for people like our clients, like I teach them, like, learn the minerals, learn how to feel your own body, learn how to trust your intuition, learn how to understand, like, maybe one day you might need a little bit more B6 than you did a couple days ago if you're going through stress or trauma or grief, and like understand your body's cues to be able to supplement properly, because the protocol is a guide. It's not set in stone. And so having especially partners that understand, like, just being a woman in general, you're going to be having mood swings because we are cyclical beings. We're not following a man's 24-hour hormonal clock. We're following our 28, 29, 30-day biological clock. Yeah. And so that's what I think is also really important for people to understand too, is having that talk with a partner of, like, I had to tell my boyfriend, like, I think I'm about to start copper dumping again. Like, if I get a little bit bitchy, you're gonna just have to just work with it and just bite your tongue, because it's not worth getting in full-blown fights, which, especially when you are copper dumping, I think it's so easy because sometimes we can be looking for that trigger too to just kind of explode because we don't know how to process our emotions the right way, especially if you're trauma dumping too and you haven't learned how to do it in a healthy way or how to do it in a way that works for you. It's going to look like taking it out on your partner and getting mad over spilled milk and things like that, over things that you really shouldn't be getting mad over. But it's also like having that partner that understands that too, that can kind of work with it through you, is such a key aspect of just the relationship as a whole.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you keep bringing up like the relationship with copper and stuff, because going back to like how you mentioned astrology at the beginning, like copper is representative of like Venus, and that's the planet of like love and relationships, but it's not just that, it's also like your aesthetics and your beauty and your monetary income, like it's money.
Yep.
It's fascinating to me how, like, when we're copper dumping, a lot of it has to do with our insecurities of how we look, how much we're making, how we're feeling loved,
self-worth.
Exactly. So, and it's such because it's so emotional, and I don't mean to stereotype, but I mean, stereotypes exist for a reason. Women are emotional.
Yep.
This is why copper makes us so freaking emotional.
Yep.
You know, like, it's not. I'm not gonna say like it's not our fault, but I mean, this is what it is, and I find it so fascinating how, like, when we have these little copper dumps, that's exactly it. That's what hits us. It's like, how are we being loved? How can I love other people? How am I making enough money? You know, like, how do I look? Why don't I look good? You know, like, all these little insecurities, or pardon me, these traumas of ours just explode right on out.
And I think the same can go for men too. Men that have an overload of copper, they're not going to be in their true masculine. They might be in more of that toxic masculine, where they feel that negative pressure of, if my wife makes more than me, and wanting to be more controlling and more like emotional and can't handle his emotions in the right way, or even like cheating or things like that. I get so curious to see people that chronically cheat on their spouses. I'm like, I would love to see what your mineral profile looks like, and the narcissistic behavior, because minerals boil down to a lot of that too.
Yeah, and it's like this toxic femininity that a lot of people don't talk about. Yes, we talk about a lot with like toxic masculinity, but we can be just as bad, you guys.
Yeah.
Not worse.
Yep, for real. Yep, that's true.
We play the mental games, you know, so we're just as bad.
Yep, and it's that excess estrogen.
The estrogen, and, you know, it's not to say that estrogen is bad per se, but it's like these estrogen receptors being overstimulated and overly influenced because of the copper not being bound, because of the metalloestrogens, you know, that we're being exposed to, the endocrine disruptors, like the plastics, like there's so much going on. And sometimes it's not even that you have an overload of that, right? It's just like you're not making enough testosterone, progesterone to like offset that estrogen, right? And that comes from low thyroid function, you know, like not enough nutrients, again, you know, to be making these hormones, stress in general, like there's so many factors here.
Yep, and again, to bring that up, I think there's a lot of people that, like you said, they get focused on these sources of copper. And so I tell people, you know, it could be copper sulfate, it could be copper pipes, it could be passed in utero. If your mom or your grandmother had copper, I've been able to trace excess copper back from my grandpa's side, my grandpa on my mom's side of the family, and even on my dad's side of the family. And so it's interesting to see those mineral patterns just get passed down, because we pass down those mineral patterns to our babies. But like you said, people get so kind of hyper fixated on, well, where is this copper coming from? And I need to get all this copper out of my body. And it's like, well, no, we don't want that. We still want copper. Copper's a very essential nutrient to the body, but we want it bioavailable. We want it moving. We want it usable by the body, not just getting stored and stuck and, becoming overloaded and then creating those symptoms. But it's like we also have to retrace the steps of the adrenals and your thyroid and your metabolism and your overall nervous system function that a lot of people, I think they just miss that aspect of it.
Yeah, and also back to your point on like how you've been able to retrace with your copper on you said your grandfather's side, on your father's side or your mother's side?
Both, okay.
Because I have found a pattern where firstborn daughters will typically take a lot. Well, I don't know what it is really, but firstborn daughters tend to take a lot from their father's side, and secondborn daughters from their mother. But if you're a firstborn son, a lot from the mother side, and a secondborn son from the father side. And I just find there's like this was just a pattern I picked up on, because I picked it up with myself, with my sister. I've seen it with a couple of clients. And so it's always fascinating to see, like, paying attention to the patterns of one side of the family depending on birth order and gender, and to see if you can make like correlations.
That's interesting. See, I've always wanted to get my brother's sample because he's the only one that I haven't had a sample from. And then my grandmother on my mom's side, but she's passed for several years now. But I was like, if I ever come across a hairbrush in her stuff, I would send it off to the lab because I would love to see because she had a lot of stuff going on too. But it would be so interesting just to see how we share those minerals and then how we pick up on that from, our mom or our dad. It's so fascinating. I never thought about birth order though.
Yeah, I've been picking up on it just because I got into like the psychology of birth order, because I find it's just so interesting. I'm a very firm believer that like things happen. I don't like to say things happen for a reason, but like there's purpose behind things, right? Yep. And because I don't like to say things happen for a reason. God forbid a death happens. Because that's not a good reason.
Right.
Have happened, but it's. I feel like there is purpose behind it, and there's correlation to it, And another example I guess I could provide is like, because I'm the firstborn daughter in my family, and I took after my father. I look exactly like my father, like I'm a spitting image of the man. But my grandmother so his mother has osteoporosis, and there's a lot of mental illness on his side of the family too. And I mean, obviously me having gone through like my eating disorder, I've been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and all that stuff. And now the osteoporosis at such a young age. You go on my mother's side, no mental health issues, bones as strong as an ox, like much more like sturdy people. I'm a little bit more on the petite side. I'm 5'1", and I have like a ball of energy. And then I was able to pinpoint like certain personality types, and like I was like, hey, I wonder if their mineral patterns are very similar to mine because we act the same way. Going back to that whole personality and mineral thing, So
yeah.
I found that very interesting.
That is interesting. Because both sides of the family have mental health issues and also drug addictions on my dad's side of the family. So most of his family, which they were able to get out of Indiana, moved to Florida when he was very young, but most of his like grandfathers, cousins have all died even at a young age of drug addictions, which is like that magnesium deficiency and things like that. And so it's interesting to see that, magnesium deficiency is so common now with everybody. But my dad's test, he was magnesium deficient, and he's been dumping copper for a couple years now too. And it's so interesting because he's kind of similar to you. Like, he just can't get over a copper dump. Like, which he's not doing all of the, supplements and the nutritional and the lifestyle things that he should be doing. But it's interesting, like, every test that I've done on him the past, like, 3 or 4 years now is just all just dumping copper, and he
Yep.
feels it too. Like, he has the symptoms of that. He just can't get out of a copper dump, and the only thing that helps him is homeopathy, really, which is also interesting. But
because I had stopped minerals for a while and I was doing homeopathy, because I felt like supplements were just, it's not that they were not helping me, I just felt they were too aggressive for me.
yes,
And I was working with I was working with two different homeopaths. I was working with one here in Montreal where I live, and the problem was that he was too hyper focused on my hormones, and I was telling him, like, my hormones, it's not my hormones, it's like I'm copper dumping, like it's my nervous system, like, and he's like, no, it's your hormones. And he wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't right, you know.
Yep.
And I felt like he was just too focused on, like, where's your estrogen, your progesterone? And I was like, my period is not that bad, you know, like this is not the issue. And then I found another lady who basically was trying to do retracing with me, where she was doing like more of those heroic doses of homeopathy where you're reaching like 1 million, you know,
Yep.
not like the 30 CH or the 9 CH, which is like really more for like small little acute issues, like a cut or a bruise or like a, you know, whatever.
Yep.
So she was trying to retrace like with like more psychological things, and I kid you not, like in a matter of 2-ish months, I was feeling massively different. I was like, whoa, what is this? Like, my psychologically, I was like, this is nuts. And so it's interesting to me how with your dad, homeopathy is the only thing that works, because I feel like it's almost like it's not that we need something working at the cellular level, we really need something more on the energetic level.
Yes. Yep. And I've been dabbling into homeopathy the past like 2 years now. But even for me, when I was in my 4 lows pattern, last summer in particular, when I was still kind of dealing with a little bit of panic attacks and anxiety here and there, wasn't near as severe, but I kind of just had to stop the supplements because it just felt like it was too much for me. And for whatever reason, I felt like I was getting enough through my food at the time because I was focused on nourishing, high quality, nutrient dense meals and, you know, fresh fruits and local produce and things like that, grass fed meat. But the supplements just felt, I mean, even just like a very low dose of it, it almost like would worsen my symptoms sometimes. And so I started dabbling into homeopathy, and just working with even just like the 30C would help snap me out of a panic attack within 15 minutes. And I might have had to take a second dose, but it was very rare. And even now, like if somebody's experiencing anxiety, I'm like, do you want to try it? Because it'll like, and that's what works for my dad, is that arsenic album 30C. And it, within minutes, it's like, you're just grounded and your energy is just at your baseline again. Because like you said, I think, you know, working at the cellular level is so important, but sometimes it's not what the body needs right away. And so I think understanding like what our bodies are truly craving obviously is nutrients, but sometimes I think, especially in a 4 lows pattern too, or if like you are like drastically metal dumping, it just might be too much for your body, because some of us are so sensitive. I've had one client in particular that it's just been so sensitive for her to just do even foot soaks. Just triggers hair
Does
loss.
Does she have MCAS or something? Or
does she have what?
Does she have MCAS, like mast cell activation? Or people like that, when they're reacting, like you know immediately, histamine issues, like copper issues, MCAS issues, like you have to be so gentle with them. It's so I actually had a client too, like I think I was working with her for almost a year, maybe a little over that, and no matter what we were doing, nothing was working. And I was like, I think you just need to go to therapy. Like, and I said that ever so, like, lovingly, you know, like it was like, I don't think you need me now. I think you need to work through things. And she didn't want to go to a therapist. And what we ended up doing is we started doing journal prompting with her. Like I would send her journal prompts to write. And within 3 months of journal prompts, she was already feeling better. It was amazing to me how she just needed
to work through. Yeah.
She needed the permission to release things, which is insane.
Yeah, because I think so many times I have in the course that I've been working on for the past like 2 years now, I've had journal prompts in there, like a whole bunch of journal prompts, especially for moms to work through. Because I think the way that a lot of us grew up was that we can't feel our emotions and we can't react.
Yeah.
And so, especially depending on like the family dynamic, it was always like, well, you're crying, I'll give you something to cry about, rather than, well, why are you crying? And let's sit down and talk about this. And I had recorded a module in my course the other day of like victim consciousness, and I created this thing called the regulation ladder. So it's like dorsal vagal, sympathetic, and ventral vagal, and just like kind of mapping out the nervous system for parents to understand their kids a little bit more too. But it's like whenever you have a kid that has an anger outburst or a meltdown, and especially the kids that have multiple meltdowns a day, the communication is so important. Not necessarily during, because it can kind of be stimulating to them, especially if they're dealing with pandas, autism, ADHD, things like that. But the after effect of that communication is something that I never got as a kid of, well, let's understand like why you reacted this way, and do you understand why it was wrong, and just having that like a very calm, safe conversation. I think a lot of our generation didn't get. It was always like you got your butt whooped, or you got put in the corner or told to go to your room, and you didn't get told why it was wrong or why we don't act like that, but you just knew not to act like that ever again without an explanation. And so I think that's caused a lot of the older Gen Zs and millennials to turn into more of that gentle parenting approach, or to just not want to have kids at all, or they hold in so much of their trauma, especially from childhood, because they never got to fully express themselves.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like fear that's being put on like women in general about like having children, you know, like what it does to your body, like what it's going to take away from you, your career, your freedom, all these things. And I think you can have it all, even with a child or like several children. You know, like I've seen it in myself. You know, I'm not saying it's easy. You know, yeah. It's definitely hard. You know, but I think it also has a lot to do with, yeah, like it's not just our minerals and our hormones and stuff. And keep in mind that many women today also are on some form of birth control that completely shuts off this like maternal instinct to like want to have a child or care for it, or like,
even care for themselves.
Exactly.
A lot of women on birth control, you just shut down and you don't want to provide for yourself. It's like running off of coffee, Adderall, birth control, not wanting to nourish your body, not wanting to even hide something as simple as just hydrating. It's just it shuts your body off from doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's so many things that go into this, you know, like from our upbringing to like how we're processing emotions to the medication so many people are on and all that stuff. But I think it's all about opening up this conversation and just being like, it's okay. Like having a child is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, you know, and I grew up very differently too. I mean, like I grew up with a single mom. She was raising 2 girls, you know, feminist as you can get. And my whole life, I thought I would never want to have children. Ever. Yeah. I was like, it's never going to happen. I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. I'm going to be a boss babe, all that stuff. And, you know, it's when I got my period back after like my eating disorder, which also doesn't help, you know, but I was like, no, kind of want a kid.
Yeah, well, and when I was first diagnosed with celiac, and then all of my food allergies after that, so at that time I was probably around 13, 14, which is too young to want to even talk about children anyway, but I remember being like, I never want to have kids because I never want them going through, like I had to have a colonoscopy and upper endoscopy when I was 12, and flown out to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and it just all these things, blood work and skin tests, and just being in pain from all that. And I remember being like, I never want to have kids because I never want them to go through what I went through. But then a couple years later, I was like, you know what? I have the ability to kind of repopulate my microbiome, my gut microbiome, my vaginal microbiome, replenish my minerals, and get to like the root of what's triggering, like why can't I eat eggs, why can't I eat dairy, and you know, things like that, and like why am I chemical sensitive, and just all of these things of like, it's so easy to shift into the victim mode of like, well, I don't ever want, which some people do, I think, have it genuinely coming from heart, but I think for others, it's that victim mindset of people wanting to be dependent on something, or like kind of feeling bad for them because of what has happened to them. But it's like, you have the ability to rewrite your story. Like, you have a past, but you have the ability to rewrite the narrative for the future. And so it also just doesn't help that every birth story that you hear on the internet is just negative and ends up in a C-section, or, you know, cracking their pelvis or something. Like, there's not enough positive birth stories on there, which I think for some people, they feel like they can't share a positive birth story because then they'll get told like, oh, well, that's lucky that this happened to you, or you got lucky, or whatever. But it's like, at the end of the day, you had the power to, you know, come up with however you wanted to give birth, because a lot of it starts in your mind. And I think that's where a lot of people, like we said before, like, you're holding all of this trauma inside, and generational birth trauma as well, that gets passed on, that we're not allowing our bodies or allowing ourselves to be responsible for what we truly want for the rest of our life, or even for our kids' lives.
Yeah, everything the power of the mind is very, very, I actually have someone in my life who's very special to me, and he always says, like, I don't tell my body doesn't tell me what to do, I tell it what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like that. It's a mental thing. I'm not saying everything is meant, like, you can't just like you can't just think yourself well all the time, but you kind of can in a way, because when you start believing in it and that you know that you can do it, your body will respond to it better. You know, your body won't be stressed, it won't be afraid, like it's not going to hold on to old patterns, you know, like, you believe in it, your body will respond better with the steps and allowing you to get to like the goal that you want to.
Yes, absolutely. Like, the power of being delusional is insane.
Is it really delusion, you know, when it's actually real?
That's true. That's true. But it's like, everyone on TikTok, it's like, if you want to believe something, like, you have to, like, well, they use the word delusional, but it's like, you have to truly believe that you are going to experience that one day, and then it eventually happens. Where it's like, I wrote down all of the goals that I had for the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and a lot of them have already come true, because I've just been looking at my vision board, I make like a bingo card of goals so that I can like check it off and get to bingo. But it's like a game. It's like, literally, because life is kind of like a game. So it's like, you're playing the game of life, and like, delusionally or manifesting, or whatever term you want to use, like, reaching those goals, because you're constantly visualizing it, you're thinking about it, and you're telling yourself that you're going to achieve that. And I think that's what I think a lot of women get stuck on, is the victim mindset. And I had it was like, I'm always going to have bad periods because I have endometriosis. I'm always going to have really bad mood swings because of my PMDD. And it's like, I am not my diagnosis. Like, I am me. And it's like, we have to pull that apart and separate and like detach from that, because so many people get caught up on being, well, I have ADHD, so I guess I'm just never going to be able to focus to write a paper. And it's like, well, no, you're just using that as an excuse because you don't want to write your paper. You know what exactly. I mean?
Yeah, like, you have to stop identifying with that and start understanding that you are a person, and you are your own person. And it's the very same thing as, like, you know, with my eating disorder. Like, I remember, you know, people would be like, oh, you're the anorexic, you know, like, you're it's like, suddenly it's become like my identity. And it's like, no, I'm not the anorexic. I have anorexia, you know, it's very different. So it's like, it doesn't identify me. It's not who I am as a person. I'm just struggling with this situation now. And so it doesn't mean that it's like, you know, when you're going out to eat, or like, you know, how you look, or who you are as a person, what you like, what you dislike, you know, you can't you can't use that as an excuse for the things that you want to do in life. Is it hindering you now? Absolutely, but it does not mean that it's going to be there for forever, because it's not you.
Exactly.
You're up, right?
Yep, for sure. Yep, and that's what I wish more people would understand is the law of detachment is so helpful, but like detaching your diagnosis especially, or even what you think that you have, because I think a lot of people, we are self-diagnosing on Google or on other practitioners' pages or on the CDC's page or whoever we're getting the information from. It's like we think, oh, we have this, and it's like I could probably come up and self-diagnose myself with so many different things, but I'm not going to, because it doesn't actually help. I've even said before, sometimes a diagnosis doesn't help you. Like sometimes for some people it can be nice because like, okay, like for a client that I had, he had pandas. Well, it was nice to know that you have pandas, but I knew that you had it because we found strep off the chart in your GI map. So it's like we knew that was prevalent. We knew that you had the symptom, or that their child had the symptoms, but also it was like, did that diagnosis really help us? Because it's the same protocol. We're going to be using the same protocol that we found on the test results, but the doctor, it's almost like some people need that credibility from doctors, but you should find it from within and your own innate wisdom, because the doctors aren't always going to help you anyway. They're just going to put a band-aid on it.
Exactly, and I feel like we've been sort of brainwashed into feeling like we need a name to the cluster of diagnoses, rather than just understand the connections of the symptoms.
Yes.
Yes. Just because you have like X and Y symptom and you're going to put a name to it does not mean that it's going to give us a better plan to just understanding why you have the symptoms in the first place.
Yes. Yep. So I think it's individual. I think like some people, it's helpful to know that they have PCOS, but then also at the same time, it's like, well, we can look at your labs and we can see what you need to work on anyway, and clean up your light hygiene and clean up your circadian rhythm and clean up your nutrition and drink your filtered water and, start working on the foundations first, because I think that's what a lot of people lack is those foundations. And they want the diagnosis because in their mind, but that's just what we've been taught too. Like traditionally speaking, if women had a bad menstrual cycle, they would go to their grandmother or their aunt or somebody in their village or their neighbor and ask for help, and go to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the red tent, but it's like going towards like that village and that community of women. And now instead of doing that, we're dependent on doctors, we're dependent on even something I had to work on just recently was my Aura ring. I was getting so dependent on my Aura ring of like tracking my cycle and telling me my sleep, and there would be some nights where I slept really good and it would tell me that I didn't sleep good at all. And it's just like, am I going to let an app tell me? So I've been 1 week yesterday without wearing it, and it's been weird because I'm like, I don't feel it on my finger, I can't just, but I was checking my Aura ring app over 10 times a day to see my heart rate and my HRV and my steps. And it's like knowing intuitively that I am doing the right thing and kind of just like tracking my cycle intuitively speaking is so much more freeing than an app or being dependent on an app, just like a lot of people are just dependent on doctors to tell them what they have is wrong. And it's like, do you need permission from somebody to tell you that you have something wrong, or do you need that validation, or can you just understand that you do have something that you need fixing and you just have to figure out what that is?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That like you hit the nail on the head, and going back to also like the points of where you're mentioning the foundations and stuff. I feel like so many people have been taught to think like if it's not medication, it's supplements that we're going to need, but really it's the basics and also the intuition of listening to your body. Yes. Really and truly, like I'm sure you've seen this in your practice. You give people just the basic stuff, nutrition, sleep, lifestyle, whatever. Half the time, like the supplements are just like little sprinkles on top.
Yes. Or even I had one client that I was working with, a little boy, and his parents they were just trying to do everything right for him, and he was seeing a I can't think of it at the top of my head. Neurofeedback, chiropractor. They were working with an allergist for his food allergies, working with me. So he was doing a lot of things, a lot of protocols. And he kept telling them, like, Mommy, I don't want to go to the chiropractor anymore. Like, I just don't want to go. And they would be like, well, it's time to go. Like, we have an appointment. He was like, please don't take me. I just don't want to go. And I was the one that had to tell him, I was like, he might be communicating that something just doesn't feel right with him going, because I believe that kids have a very much stronger intuition than most adults do. And I don't think that kids are always just picky eaters or just defiant or being just, difficult. But then come to find out that they were doing a vibration plate with him like 3 or 4 times a week. And then we got his histamine test back, and his histamine was elevated. And so that vibration plate was just releasing histamine in his body. And then the next day at school, he would have a bad day at school compared to the days that he didn't go to the chiropractor. And then he would have good days at school. And so it was really interesting to see, like, he knew that intuitively the chiropractor, because they were doing that vibration plate, was releasing excess histamine that his body wasn't working optimally to clear out. And he knew that that wasn't a right space for him at 6 or 7 years old. And so it's crazy to, like, allow our children to make those connections as well and listen to them, because I think so often we're like, we're the adults, we're going to tell you what to do. But it's like, your child also knows their body. We have to trust that they know their body and what they think is best for them too.
Yeah, I like how you said that you feel like children are a little more intuitive, because I feel it's something that we're born with. And I don't want to compare us to animals, but we are technically animals, where you can see, like, if you have a dog, a cat, like whatever, they know what to eat. They know when to sleep. They know when to rest. Like all these, they can hear things, see things. We're not taught that. We're very, very disconnected from that whole process. But when we are born as children, we still have that innate process, because we haven't lived long enough to be taught that
any other way. Yep.
Exactly.
Or allow society to come in and shut down that intuition and close us off from, like, because they come in with the fluoride and with the vitamin D fortified foods and the calcium fortified foods, and calcify the pineal gland, and then it just leads to, like, a snowball effect, and, like, we get so closed off from, like, what our true wisdom is. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, do you want to cap it? We've been yapping for an hour.
Sure. That sounds like a plan.
Okay. All right, well, tell me where everyone can find you. Instagram, are you on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, things like that?
I'm on Instagram at Barbara Madimenos, and you can also find me, well, I just started a podcast. I'm very, very slow, you guys, called the Life Cycles Podcast on Spotify and on YouTube. And
and I can link all those in the show notes too.
Excellent. Yeah, that would be so much fun.
Yep, awesome.